Hello and welcome back to my kitchen. If you've just found my channel, my name is Selena and today I want to show you how to make basic bread but some variations on that. So if you've been watching me for a while, you'll know that I made white bread maybe a year ago, around about a year ago, maybe even longer. And it's a basic white bread recipe, but it is a really good recipe. It's the kind of recipe that we just live off it. So day in, day out, I'm making bread and that's the recipe that I choose to use. What I want to do today is show you that you don't have to just have white bread. I've tweaked that recipe to make into some different kinds of bread. So we're going to do wholemeal bread today. We're going to do a fruit loaf. So think like the cafe raisin toast. You know, the one that you buy at the shop. The one you buy at the shop and they charge you an absolute fortune for a piece of toast with some butter. So we're going to make that one. We're also going to make some rye and we're going to make like a seeded bread. Now, I'm going to show you those and then there's flexibilities within that as well. So first I want to show you, yesterday I made some dark rye. This is dark rye, okay? And you can see the color is dark. It's beautiful and soft still. Even though I made this yesterday, I would still eat this for a sandwich. So for fresh homemade bread that stays soft, this recipe really is a winner. This is stale. I made this about 4 days ago, but this is light rye. And the only difference is the color and one ingredient. So I'm going to show you how to make light rye because I've run out of light rye and I've got this dark rye here. I will tell you how to make it into dark rye if you prefer dark rye though. The number one way I keep my bread fresh is I store it in a zip bag. So I have a couple of these floating around in my kitchen at all times and I just put new fresh loaves of bread in them. So they get used multiple times. The thing with if you're going to store bread in a zip bag is you must make sure it's cold, room temperature cold, so not like in the fridge, well before you go putting it in there. Otherwise you'll get condensation. Condensation equals moisture. Moisture is mold, okay? So that's how I store my bread. I have tried storing my bread in brown paper bags. I've tried storing it in like big bread container things, and I've also tried like tea towel cloth bags. Nothing kept it fresh quite like a good quality freezer strength zip bag. So that is what I swear by storing my bread. I don't normally slice it before, we slice it as we need it sort of thing. Because I'm going to be making quite a few loaves today, I will be freezing some of this because my family doesn't need 4 or 5 loaves of bread floating around ready to be eaten all at once. So what I'm going to do is freeze some, and this bread recipe freezes beautifully. I won't be slicing it before I freeze it. I'll be wrapping it tightly in Glad wrap, popping it in a freezer bag and keeping it in my freezer. In order to use the bread, I will simply take it out the day before and it will be perfect to use just like it was freshly baked. Okay, so getting straight into it, this is my rye. Because I've got to make some new ones today, I thought I'd show you again for anyone who missed the video on what I do with extra bread. With stale bits of bread, all I do is when they've had their day, they're finished, we're not going to eat these today, and we're making new bread, I simply cut it into cubes. I didn't always cut it into cubes, but I find that cutting it into cubes is easiest on my food processor when I want to turn this into breadcrumbs. So that's all I do with stale bread. Nothing goes to waste here. That is a big thing in my kitchen and something I'm trying to encourage everyone who's watching. We don't need to waste things. We can reuse things. Everything can serve a purpose. And so these cubes of old stale bread that I continually add to live in my freezer. Once my bag is full, I put it through my food processor and I have fresh breadcrumbs that also live in my freezer. So have a look at my rye. This is a beautiful dark rye and I have given it a decorative top. there, and I'll show you how to do all of that today as well. So if you're new, all of today's recipes can be found at the bottom of my description box, all right? All I put down there are the ingredients. You do need to watch my video in order to see the method, and that is purely because there's just not enough room in there for everything that I need to share. I will be making today's recipes in a KitchenAid mixer. You can make all of these using a bread machine. You can use a KitchenAid or equivalent stand mixer. You can also make all of these recipes by hand if you would like. So, to get started, a couple of things you need to know. We're going to need bread tins. The bread tins I'm using are actual bread baking tins, all right? I line mine with baking paper, also known as parchment paper, and I reuse that paper. I have 2 tins that I'm going to use, this one and this one here, and this one has a lid. And what the lid does is it gives you the square style loaf, all right? I'm going to make the same sized bread, even though the lidded tin is a little bit bigger. That loaf just always turns out a little bit smaller. So I will make one batch of dough in the bread machine too to show you how to do that. It could not be simpler. The other thing to note is I make all of my bread using digital scales. This seems to be a topic that upsets some people. I'm not sure why people get upset over people choosing to use digital scales versus cup measurements. The reason I use digital scales is they are far more accurate, and baking is a science, all right? So I use metric because I'm Australian. We use metric here. My digital scales actually will show you, if you press the unit button, different measurements too, like pounds and ounces. So if that's something you're more familiar with, have a look for some digital scales that give you those kind of measurements, and by all means write down the recipe in something you're more familiar with. If you're going to make this and you want to use a stand mixer, you need to use a dough hook. A dough hook looks like this, okay? And you also want to make sure you use the slowest speed that your mixer has. Now, KitchenAid, I do believe, don't like you to use their machine to knead doughs and things like that for more than 2 minutes. And I can understand that because machines burn out when you use them to mix really tough things, and dough can be quite tough. So what we will do is we will mix for about 2 minutes, even though ideally 10 minutes would be what you would want. We will mix for 2 minutes and we will give our dough longer to rest, and that will counteract the fact that we haven't kneaded it, which is what the dough hook's going to do for as long. In all honesty, I very rarely use the mixer to make bread. I just use my bread machine. And I do recommend, if you want to make bread daily or multiple times a week, if this is sort of the direction you're heading, invest in a bread machine. My bread machine is the Breville Baker's Dozen. It was around $200. I will make sure there's a link to a bread machine in my description box for anyone chasing one. The reason I recommend it is because for $200, I have a machine that has been designed to knead dough. My KitchenAid machine was around $1,000, so I really don't want to burn that out making bread every day. My other thing is my food processor, my Smart Intelli kitchen machine, which I've had multiple questions about on many videos. I've used it to make bread as well because it has a dough hook attachment, and I did burn one of those out. So that's actually my second machine. So I don't recommend using equipment that isn't designed to actually do the work on a regular basis. If you only want to make bread sort of a couple of times a year, by all means, stick with what you've already got. But if you're really wanting to get into making bread, have a look at a machine that is designed to knead dough. Anyway, moving on from that, These recipes are basic. They're very similar to my original white recipe. In fact, it is my original white recipe tweaked, okay, to make every single one of these recipes. I'm not going to mess around with blooming yeast and things like that, which is the traditional way to make yeast breads. I'm going to show you the quick way, the shortcut way. Let's just get some bread made. So in a bowl, I am going to put 300 mils of warm water. If you go over like I just did, tip it out. Don't just keep going. $300 mils of warm water. I have adjusted this recipe since I first came up with it way back when, and I now, instead of 10 grams of oil, I add 15. But if you would prefer to add 10, add 10. 10 to 15 is my new recipe, but I'm going to add 15 to all of these. I find that little bit of extra oil just adds softness to our bread. I'm also, to this, going to add, so the bread I'm going to make in this one is the wholemeal bread. And so to that, I'm just going to add a teaspoon of salt. And that is a heaped teaspoon because my teaspoon is actually just slightly small. But 1 standard teaspoon of salt to that. Now I want to add some wholemeal flour. And this is just wholemeal plain flour. I think you can get wholemeal baker's flour, and if you can get wholemeal baker's flour, use 500 grams of wholemeal baker's flour. Because I can't get wholemeal baker's flour, or I haven't gotten wholemeal baker's flour, what I'm going to do is add 300 grams of wholemeal flour and 200 grams of baker's flour, which is just white flour. Baker's flour and plain flour are different because they are different wheat. And the difference in the wheat is the protein content. And the protein content is the gluten, and the gluten is what makes your bread good. It's what makes it different. It gives it the structure that bread needs. To that, I'm just going to add some yeast and some bread improver. So my recipe originally called for 2 teaspoons of yeast and 2 teaspoons of bread improver. I have adjusted that slightly to be 1.5 teaspoons of yeast and 1 teaspoon of bread improver. And the reason I've done that is simply because these ingredients have gotten quite expensive. So to save some money by getting a little bit more out of each package, so to save some money, but also these breads, they do well, they do just fine with just that reduced amount. So that's it. You saw I just dumped everything in there. I'm going to turn this on and let it knead really slow, the slowest speed my KitchenAid will go, for 2 minutes, and then I'm going to pull it out. So you can see my dough has formed a ball. It's nice and smooth, and it's just getting worked around inside the bowl for a couple of minutes. Okay, it's been a couple of minutes. I'm going to turn that off, pull out my dough. You should be able to touch it without it sticking. It shouldn't be sticky. You can see the bowl is pretty clean. Okay, and my dough has formed a nice ball. What I'm going to do is, if I was just making this one loaf, I wouldn't even take it out of that bowl. But because I'm making a few, I'm going to just put it into this bowl. All right, you should be able to feel it. It should feel nice and pliable. It's not a sticky dough. We're going to cover this. You can cover it with just a clean tea towel if you prefer. I'm going to use Glad wrap today so that I can see which one of my doughs is which. That's my wholemeal. I'm going to set it aside and move on to making the next bread. I will also go through the sizes of my bread tins and things like that. The next bread I want to make is going to be the fruit loaf. The fruit loaf is just slightly different, but mostly the same. Again, 300 mils of water, warm water. Okay. 15 grams or 15 mils of oil. I use olive oil because I like olive oil. You use whatever oil you like. You can also substitute oil for butter if you prefer to have butter in your bread. I do find when I've used butter instead of oil, my bread hasn't stayed soft for as long. So just keep that in mind. The salt is the same, a good heaped teaspoon of salt. We are going to add sugar to this bread. So this one is really similar to my hot cross bun recipe, which was again an adaptation of the white bread. So I'm adding 2 tablespoons of just some white sugar. If you prefer to use honey or maple syrup, you can do that. 2 tablespoons of either of them is a good substitute for your sugar. Okay, to that I want to add my flour, and I'm just using 500 grams of white baker's flour, and I did manage to get onto an organic supplier in Australia. So all my flour, apart from that wholemeal, is now organic, which I'm very excited about. I was hoping to make the move over to organic. It was a step we wanted to make, but because we've been making bread for a long time, it's not, I wouldn't probably learn to make bread using organic flour if you were worried about cost, because it's quite a lot dearer. Now we're going to add again 1.5 teaspoons of our yeast and 1 teaspoon of bread improver. And bread improver is a bit of vitamin C, and it's a bit of yeast, and I think it's actually rice flour as well. And the purpose of that is it actually makes your bread softer, and it also I find it keeps it for longer. Bread improver is entirely optional. If you can't get your hands on it, you don't need it. It's just something that over the years I have realized I prefer. So that's the basic white bread there with a bit of sugar. Now to that, I want to add some spices. So I want to add 1 teaspoon of mixed spice. And this is a 1/2 teaspoon measure, so I'm doing 1 big heaped 1/2 teaspoon to equal 1. And a big teaspoon of cinnamon. And the great thing about making your own breads is you can put what you like to eat in them. You don't have to be stuck with whatever the shop is giving you, all right? So right now, it's just a basic spiced bread. And I want to add some dried fruit. So I've got a cup of dried fruit, and your options are to add this at the end so you get nice big plump pieces of dried fruit, or you can add it now, and what it will do is it will break up the sultanas and the currants and things like that and make them sort of more dispersed through your loaf. So it's entirely up to you if you want to add your fruit now or if you want to add it at the end. What I'm going to do is a mixture of both. So I'm going to add 1/2 or 3/4 now, get that dispersed through. Then just before I'm happy with my dough to come out, I'll add the last bit, but I'll show you doing that. Mixed fruit is a combination of raisins, mixed peel, sultanas, currants, things like that. You can just use raisins, you can just use sultanas, whatever you want. This is fruit loaf, you do what you like. So again, turning that on, 2 minutes, working its way around the dough hook to give us a lovely soft dough. And I'll show you just before that 2 minutes is up, probably at about the 1.5 minute mark, we will add our dried fruit. All right, so I'm happy that my dough has formed a beautiful ball. I'm just going to add the rest of my dried fruit. And let that come together. Okay, so again, we are ready to pull that out and put it in a bowl to rest. So the dough is going to take about an hour, maybe an hour and a half, depending on your conditions in your kitchen, to rise. So now the fruit dough is slightly more sticky than your regular dough, and that is simply because it's got all that fruit in it. All right, so I'm going to just give that a clean. I'm going to clean out my bowl and my dough hook this time simply because we've got fruit and spices in there and I don't want them in my next loaf. But just like that, we want to cover this. I'm going to sit it with our wholemeal loaf and let it rest. I've cleaned out my bowl and my dough hook. Now we're going to make the rye bread. So listen carefully because there are 2 tweaks for rye. And to make light rye, the one that I'm going to make today, we want 320 grams of water. If you're making dark rye, you want 330 grams, okay? So there is a difference. Other than that, that is the water, 320 for light rye. Again, we want 15 mils of oil. All right, a teaspoon of salt. For the flour, we want 350 grams of white baker's flour. So whenever I have made rye, it's always got baker's flour in it. Whenever I have tried to make rye with pure rye flour, the dough becomes too dense because rye flour is quite different to wheat flour. Rye is a different grain, all right? If you're wanting to make this using spelt or any of those other alternative sort of grains, I would probably test it using this light rye. So substitute the light rye for your spelt or something else and see how that works. Other than that, I haven't made spelt flour or buckwheat or anything like that. So I can't give you first-hand answers to those sorts of questions. We want 150 grams of our rye flour. So even bought rye usually contains some wheat flour, okay? Just keep that in mind. If you're thinking that rye is like gluten-free, you might want to have a closer look because I thought it was when I was buying rye and it wasn't. So 150 grams of rye and 350 grams of baker's flour. The same measurements of 1.5 teaspoons of yeast, and I'm just using an instant yeast, and 1 teaspoon of bread improver. If you want to make this dark rye, also add 20 grams of cocoa powder. Cocoa powder is what is going to make it go dark. Now, when you buy rye, I bought a rye, it was a couple of months ago now. I was on a picnic, we were out, and we decided, oh, let's grab some rye because we came across some in a shop, and it was like, I haven't seen it in years. So we bought some, it looked good, and it was only after getting it and on closer inspection seeing that the colour was purely colouring and it also had some flavouring in it. So your other thing you can do is you can add some caraway seed and some molasses. Now molasses and caraway are in rye often, but not always. I don't normally have caraway seeds, so I'm not adding them, and I don't want to add the molasses because without it, the light rye, it tastes very similar to white bread, and my family don't realise it's a different grain, so this is what I do. If you want to add molasses, add 10 grams, and if you want to add caraway seeds, just, that's up to you. So that is it. For dark rye, add 20 grams of cocoa on top of that and change that water to be 330. So turn it on, let it do its thing. You will find this one is stickier, but that's okay. All right, I'm happy with that. Now, because I am going to make the last loaf in my bread machine, I'll leave this one in this bowl and I'll just cover this and put it aside with the other ones before I move on to doing our last loaf, the seeded loaf in our bread machine. But before I get to that, I want to show you, so the bread tin measurements, we are 11 centimeters at the top. This one is 24 centimeters this way and 10 centimeters deep. And this one is the same, 11, 10, and then 27 at the top. Okay, I got this tin from an op shop of a bakery had closed down, so I picked up that one. This one, I will make sure there's a link on Amazon. This particular one I don't think is made anymore, but I'll make sure one that is equivalent is linked on Amazon. These are high quality bread tins. They're not just a standard tin that I've bought from the supermarket, but you can use those as well. You don't have to use this sort of bread tin. This is just what I use. And then I always line them with a bit of paper. I've tried doing it many ways. I've tried greasing it, I've tried flouring it, and I always have had catching. So if I just use some paper, and I'll make sure my white bread recipe video is linked because I go into a little bit more detail in how I fold it, but there you go. That's the bread tin situation. So when I'm making any of these loaves in my bread machine, I take my bread machine bowl, set the scales to 0 again. This particular one is going to be my seeded bread. It's going to have a white base, white bread base. So it's very similar to multi-grain bread, all right, that you might be used to at the supermarket. And it is 300 grams of warm water, 15 grams of olive oil. All right, now when I'm using the bread machine, I don't put the salt in, I put it at the top because this is the second bread pan I've had to buy, and what happened was the salt sort of corroded at the surface, and I don't want that to happen. So I always put the salt at the top if I'm using the bread machine. So I've got the water and the oil. Next in, I'm going with the flour. Again, 500 grams of white baker's flour. And I will make sure in my description box is linked to the organic flour that I have found. There is availability on Amazon for Australia. I'm not sure about the rest of the world, but for Amazon, we want to add our yeast and our bread improver, so 1.5. And I'll pour my yeast on one side of this bread tin and the salt on the other side. Now they're going to get mixed together straight away, I know that, but just to keep them separated to begin with is a little bit helpful because salt has a habit of sort of retarding the yeast, stopping it doing its job, stopping it rising. So if you don't put salt in your bread's going to taste like nothing. I don't know how else to describe it other than it tastes like nothing. You'll be eating it and going, this tastes like nothing, and that's because you forgot the salt. And I have forgotten the salt before. So here is the basic white bread that we just use, okay? To that, I want to add some nuts, seeds, things like this. So on this tray, okay, what I have here is 2 tablespoons of pepitas, 1 tablespoon of sunflower seeds, 1 tablespoon of black sesame, 1 tablespoon of white sesame, 1 tablespoon of poppy seeds, and I didn't have any linseed on its own, but I had LSA, and LSA is linseed sunflower and almond meal. So it's got a little bit of nut in it. So I'm going to add that, and that's 1 tablespoon of LSA. If I didn't have the LSA, I would have just had a tablespoon of linseed. Straight in on top, I'm also going to add 2 tablespoons of rolled oats. You can also add cracked wheat, you can add cracked corn, you can add hemp seeds, okay? I haven't been able to find a supplier of like your traditional multigrain seed mix as such, but I find this makes a really nice seeded bread. So that is it. We are ready now for the bread machine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that on the dough setting. If you wanted the bread machine to go through the full process and cook the loaf of bread, all you need to do is hit the start button, okay? But because I want this to be dough, I want to put this into the bread tin, I'm going to hit the dough setting, which is about an hour and a half. So by the time my other breads are ready, this one will be ready and we'll be able to form them all and make them all look beautiful, and I'll show you how to finish them off. All right, in there, lock it into place. And then over here, we have a dough button. All right, so if you've been following me for a while, you'll know this will be not new information to you, but I buy my flour in bulk and I store them in these large buckets. Now this bucket will hold a 12.5 kilo bag of flour. So when I'm buying a bulk bag of flour, I make sure I've got a whole bucket dedicated to it. These won't let insects or anything into them either. So they're well sealed, fantastic food grade buckets. I get this one from Bunnings. This one is the 20 litre and it holds the 12.5 kilo bag of flour. The smaller one, which is I think 11 litres, it holds a 5 kilo bag of flour. If you are chasing organic flour, which I mentioned in my recent Costco video, that I was chasing some organic flour. Well, I found some online and the company that I'm able to get 12.5 kilo bags of organic flour from was Honest to Goodness, and I've been buying the whole grain milling company flour. They also have the same brand of flour available on Amazon in 5 kilo bags. So I'll make sure both of those, Amazon and the Honest to Goodness website, are linked in my description below if you're chasing bulk flour, because when you're making your own bread, buying flour in bulk makes it cheaper. Of course, that's just organic flour. For many years, I haven't used organic and I've just used regular baker's flour and plain flour and things like that. And I've sourced that from various different places, one of which was Costco. So if you're not looking for organic, definitely look at Costco for good quality baker's flour. So 2 of our loaves are ready. Our wholemeal and our raisins. So I've turned my oven on. It's at 180 to 200 degrees Celsius. What we need to do is let these have their second rise in their pan. So as you can see, we have doubled in size here. And what I'm going to do is just finish off my bread. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to finish your bread off. So this is just some plain flour here, because there is a little bit of stick to our dough and I don't want it sticking to my board. So when I roll up dough for a loaf tin, I roll it like a log, I guess, just like that. Try and keep it pretty even. I tuck in the little ends and I just sort of smooth it over just like that. That's how I would roll just for a plain loaf of bread, and that one's a little longer because it's going in my longer tin. There. And then I just sit it in there like that. And I need to let this have its second rise. Before I get to that, I'm going to just sprinkle gently on the top of my loaf, a little bit of flour. Okay, that's just going to help my bread not to stick to my lid, and slide that on. That can sit and rest while I get the next loaf ready. Now my oven will only take 2 loaves of bread at a time, and that's okay because my seeded loaf, it's going to take just a little bit longer, and my rye, I'm going to do something a little different with that one as well. So they will bake second. Right, so the fruit loaf is looking fantastic, smells beautiful. You'll never go back to buying raisin toast or cafe loaf or whatever it is actually called in the supermarket again after making this yourself, because you'll realise just how cheap it is to make and easy. It's incredibly easy, and there's nothing better than fresh. Okay, so what I'm going to do with this one, just to have a different look, I'm just going to roughly cut my loaf in 2 and then form 2 logs, okay? And I just tuck seams in to keep things nice and tidy. I want my logs to be about the same size, even though I made one bigger than the other, and put them, just tuck them in together like that. Okay, that is all I'm going to do to those 2. I'm going to cover that with a tea towel and set it to rest. So while we're waiting on those 2 loaves of bread to rise and get a second rise, we can finish off our rye bread. So for the rye, now normally I'll just put that straight in the tin exactly the same as these 2. Sometimes I'll plait them. Today I'm going to show you how to make it a little bit more of a rustic loaf, okay? So for a rustic loaf, you don't even need a bread tin. You just need a tray, which I have here, and some baking paper, also called parchment paper. All right, what I'm going to do is I've rolled my rye into a log. I'm going to plait this one. So cut your dough into 3. Now, if you're feeling fancy, you can do 4, a 4-way plait. I'm going to do 3, and I'm just rolling each log to be closer in the same thickness, okay? You can get as creative as you like when you're making bread as well. So to make the log into a plait, okay, bring this one over into there. Just like you would plait hair, all right? Okay. And plait to the end. Now you've got 2 ends that look a little bit dodgy, so pierce them, pinch them together to hold the dough into its shape, and just tuck them underneath, okay? Put it on your tray, like so. Now you can just be finished like that. I'm going to put some oats on mine. So what I need to do is I need to make sure the surface is going to hold onto some seeds or oats, whatever you want to decorate yours with. I just wet it with a bit of water. Now, and I even just use my hand. You can use a pastry brush if you feel the need. I'm just going to wet my hand. The hand that still has a little bit of dough on it even is perfect, because it kind of creates a bit of a glue, and just gently pat down my bread. Okay, now water is not going to give your dough a shine at all. If you're wanting your dough to have a shine to it, you could brush it with a bit of egg yolk, okay? That would be better. Now that I have my surface wet, but obviously not soaking wet, I'm just going to get some oats and just gently sprinkle onto the surface. Now, if you were using the caraway seeds, because this is rye, you can add that here as well. You can add sesame seeds like I did to my dark rye. You can add nothing at all if you would like, but I just thought I'd show you some different ways to make your breads stand out. It makes it a little bit more fun. It makes it a lot more impressive for anyone who's looking to impress people. There we go. Just as simple as that. I'm going to loosely cover this with a tea towel because I don't want anything sticking now. This is the final rise before we go into the oven. If we put things on here that are going to stick, like Glad Wrap, where the moisture would adhere to the bread dough, what's going to happen is when you peel that off, you're going to start deflating it. Deflating it means your bread's not going to bake beautifully, all right? So a clean tea towel. All right, my bread dough is ready. As you can see, it has also doubled in size. Now, I want to cook this in a loaf tin, so I'm going to wait out till one of those is baked, and then I'm going to use that loaf tin. Alrighty, so I have put in the oven the rye bread, and as you can see, we're getting a nice rise over here of the seeded bread. I need to sort that out. But I thought I would get these two out of their tins. Now, normally these rise a lot more than they have today. And the reason they haven't risen as much today is simply because I've put them in the oven a little earlier than I probably should. So I've let them have their second rise, but it wasn't quite long enough. So just like if you let them rise for too long and you're going to end up with like really tall, really airy sort of bread, not leaving them for long enough will result in a more dense sort of bread and not quite as tall. So if I'd left them for long enough, they would have gotten much higher, but wholemeal is probably going to be much the same. It probably hasn't even, okay. So that is looking pretty light. Now it's up to you. You can either put that straight back in the oven and give it like another 5 minutes to darken, or we can take it out as it is. I'm tapping the top. So what I do is I'll tap the top. It's the same as tapping the bottom. You're listening for something that sounds hollow. That's the sound you're looking for, okay? So I know my raisin toast is done, but my wholemeal doesn't quite sound like it's quite there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put this back in the oven, give it another 5 minutes. That's going to make it a little bit darker, which is what we like. We like our bread to have a bit more colour, not quite so white looking, and also to get that hollow sound. We need the hollow sound. If it's not quite cooked through the middle, it's not a pleasant bread to eat. So back in the oven for 5 more minutes. So that baking paper I had in my tin had already been used twice before I used it today. So it had started to disintegrate on the edges. I well and truly got my use out of that. What I'm going to do is put new baking paper in here. All I've done is scrunch this up. Now normally I make a nice neat folded paper, but because my tin is super hot, I'm just going to do this, aiming for the corners and the sides to be as smooth as possible, and getting my hands out of there quicker than I would if I was folding it. There. Okay, either way works. We can get started on our very risen seeded bread here. So I was thinking, do I want to plait this bread and put it in the tin and it'll come out looking the same style as the dark rye that I made? Or do I want to do something different? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make just a regular loaf instead of a plait, but I'm going to score the top, and I'm also going to put some seeds on the top, so it'll look individual anyway. So there you go, just like a log straight in our tin. And in just the same way as we did putting the water on our hands to make the oats stick, we're going to wet the top of this with wet hands. So don't pour water or anything like that, just a little bit of moisture on your hands. Rub it on the top till it's moist, and then we can sprinkle whatever seeds we like on top of that. So my hands are nice and wet. I'm just making sure I cover the top. You don't have to do any of this. You can just put these breads straight in the oven. I just like to have a little bit of fun with the decorating. I'm going to use some of, put that there, white sesame. All right, and then on the other side, so it's gonna be like a black and white seeded bread, I'm going to do some black sesame. Okay, just like that. Now what I want to do is let this rise. So I'm going to put this on the stove, let this have its second rise before we bake it. Since our other bread is still in the oven baking away, hopefully that's going to give this loaf a little bit more spring, the spring that the others were maybe missing. That's hot. Okay, let's get it out of here. So when you bake bread, you do want to get it out of its tin straight away. You don't want bread sitting in there at all. That sounds better. All right, so that one wasn't going to rise much more because that whole process had been done, but that's okay. Our rye is also out, whoops, looking fantastic. And can I just say, my kitchen smells incredible right now. All these breads baking. There is our plaited rye. My seeded bread needs probably 10 more minutes of rising before I can pop it in the oven. But they smell good. They're gonna taste delicious. I know these recipes off. We've been making these for years. So before my seeded bread goes into the oven, you can see it's starting to rise. I'm just going to give it a quick score across the top. All right, just like that. I want to let that rise for just a little bit longer before we pop it in. All right, let's get this one into the oven. 20 minutes. Okay, that one rose a bit better, and that's just the difference between letting it rest that little bit longer than not. That's the only difference between this bread and the other doughs. So, oh, she's hot. Ready to get that out of there. But you see the pattern? Isn't it pretty? Nice hollow sound. So that is my simple bread recipe, tweaked a couple of times to make these incredibly delicious breads. Thank you for hanging out with me in the kitchen today. I hope you did enjoy this video. Don't forget to watch my original white bread recipe video. I'll make sure it's linked. Share this one with your friends. Have a fantastic week, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.